In the bustling streets of downtown, life seemed to move too fast for anyone to notice the man sitting quietly on the corner. His clothes were worn, his hands calloused, and his eyes held the kind of tiredness that told 1,000 untold stories. This was Malcolm, a man who had seen better days but carried a quiet dignity despite the odds stacked against him. Little did he know, his ordinary day was about to take an extraordinary turn. Enter Karen, a woman whose life was worlds apart from Malcolm's. Dressed in crisp designer clothes, she carried herself with an air of entitlement that seemed to demand attention wherever she went. Spotting Malcolm, she approached, not with kindness, but with a twisted sense of superiority. She accused him of being lazy and unworthy, and before anyone could react, she reached into the small jar of coins Malcolm had carefully collected and walked away, muttering something about teaching him a lesson. But what Karen didn't know was that someone was watching. A nearby police general, Officer Daniels, had been observing the scene unfold from his car. He saw it all, the arrogance, the injustice, and Malcolm's silent despair. With a sharp sense of duty and a heart for justice, Officer Daniels stepped out, determined to intervene in a way that no one could have expected. Officer Daniels wasn't just any police officer. Known in the community for his fairness and compassion, he believed in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. As he walked toward the scene, his mind raced. He didn't just see a homeless man and a disgruntled woman. He saw an opportunity to stand up for what was right. But he knew he had to tread carefully. Karen was already causing a scene, and the situation could escalate quickly. Meanwhile, Malcolm sat frozen, his heart sinking as he watched Karen walk away with the little he had. Each coin in that jar represented hours of standing under the scorching sun, enduring stares and whispers, and hoping for a little kindness. The humiliation stung more than the loss. He had tried to stay invisible, but now he felt completely exposed. Karen, on the other hand, strode away confidently, brushing off what she'd just done as nothing significant. To her, Malcolm wasn't a person, just a symbol of everything she thought was wrong in the world. She didn't notice the shadow of Officer Daniels closing in behind her. As the officer caught up to her, Malcolm's eyes widened. People nearby began to gather, sensing something was about to happen. Officer Daniels' voice, calm but firm, broke the silence. "Ma'am, we need to talk." Karen turned sharply, startled by the voice behind her. She faced Officer Daniels with an air of annoyance, her expression tight as she crossed her arms. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her tone sharp and defensive. The gathered crowd grew larger, their curious whispers adding weight to the already tense moment. "Yes, ma'am," Daniels replied calmly, his authoritative presence unwavering. "I just saw what you did back there. Taking money that doesn't belong to you isn't right, no matter what you might think of someone's circumstances." Karen scoffed, her voice laced with disbelief. "That money, it's barely a handful of coins. It'll survive. Besides, people like him need to learn the value of hard work instead of begging for handouts." The words struck Malcolm like a blow, but he stayed quiet, his gaze fixed on the ground. Officer Daniels, however, wasn't about to let this slide. "Ma'am," he said, his voice firm but measured, "you don't get to decide someone's worth based on their struggles. Everyone deserves dignity." Karen's face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment as the crowd murmured louder. Nearby, a young woman holding her phone recorded the interaction, her expression a mix of disbelief and quiet outrage. Malcolm, still sitting by the sidewalk, finally looked up. For the first time in a long time, he saw someone standing up for him. But the tension was far from over. Karen's frustration boiled over as the crowd around them grew. She glanced at the people whispering and at the young woman holding her phone, recording every second. "This is ridiculous," Karen snapped, her voice sharp. "You're making a scene over spare change. He's sitting there doing nothing while the rest of us work hard. And now I'm the bad guy." Officer Daniels held his ground, his calm demeanor unshaken. "It's not about the money," he said, his voice steady. "It's about respect. You took something that wasn't yours. And whether it's a penny or a paycheck, it matters. Karen opened her mouth to retort, but the officer raised his hand, signaling her to stop. Let me ask you something, he continued. Do you know anything about him? About his story? Or did you decide his worth the moment you saw him sitting there? The question hung in the air, silencing the crowd for a moment. Malcolm shifted uncomfortably, unsure if he should say something or stay silent. His heart raced as he felt all eyes on him. Karen, clearly flustered, avoided the officer's gaze. It's not my responsibility to know his story, she muttered, crossing her arms again. That's where you're wrong, Daniels replied firmly. Kindness is everyone's responsibility. He turned to Malcolm, extending a hand to help him stand. Would you be willing to share your story, sir? The crowd grew silent again, waiting. Malcolm hesitated, glancing at the jar now resting on the pavement. This moment was bigger than he ever imagined, and the choice to speak could change everything. Malcolm hesitated, his hand hovering just above Officer Daniels' outstretched one. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, and he could feel the judgment, the curiosity, and the unease radiating from the crowd. Slowly, he stood, his voice soft but steady as he said, I don't have much of a story to tell, just a life that fell apart piece by piece. Lost my job, my family, and my home. But even on my worst days, I never thought someone would take what little I had left, just to prove a point. Karen rolled her eyes, but before she could retort, a voice from the crowd called out, I recognize him. A middle-aged man stepped forward, his face pale as recognition dawned. You're Malcolm Harris. You used to run Harris & Sons Construction, didn't you? A murmur swept through the onlookers as Malcolm nodded, his eyes widening in surprise. That was a long time ago, he said quietly. The man turned to the crowd, raising his voice. This man built half the houses in this neighborhood. He gave my brother a job when no one else would. His words struck a chord, and the crowd's energy shifted from skepticism to sympathy. Karen's confident posture faltered as whispers of support for Malcolm grew louder. But before anyone could process the revelation, a squad car pulled up, its lights flashing. Another officer stepped out, heading straight for Karen. Ma'am, we've received multiple reports about your behavior today, he said sternly. Karen's face went pale as the officer continued. Looks like this isn't the first time you've caused trouble. The crowd's attention shifted, the tension building as everyone braced for what would happen next. Karen's confidence crumbled as the second officer confronted her. The crowd, once murmuring with uncertainty, was now fully captivated by the unfolding scene. Karen stammered, I didn't do anything wrong. I was just trying to prove a point. The officer shook his head. We've received reports about similar incidents, ma'am, taking things from others, causing public disturbances. This behavior has consequences. He gestured toward the coins still scattered on the ground. It's time to make things right. Karen, her face red with humiliation, looked around at the crowd, searching for an ally but finding only disapproving faces. Slowly, she bent down, scooped up the coins, and handed them back to Malcolm. Here, she said through clenched teeth, avoiding his eyes. Malcolm hesitated, then took the money with a quiet thank you. But just as the tension seemed to ease, Officer Daniels turned to the second officer. Before you take further action, there's something else. He pointed to the young woman who had been filming. I think her recording might be important. The woman stepped forward, replaying the video. The footage didn't just show Karen taking the money. It captured her mocking Malcolm and the disdain in her voice. The second officer sighed, shaking his head. We'll need to address this officially, he said. As Karen was led to the squad car, Malcolm glanced at the crowd, unsure what to say. Before he could speak, the middle-aged man stepped forward again. Malcolm, he said, smiling warmly, I don't know how you ended up here, but if you're willing, I have a job for you. Let's get you back on your feet. The crowd erupted in applause, and Malcolm, for the first time in years, felt a glimmer of hope. As Officer Daniels placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, Malcolm realized that sometimes justice and kindness could come from the most unexpected places.